Hello, guys. Okay, so this is going to be the first virtual lecture, which should be interesting because we are all learning together. Can I get rid of this? Yes. Okay. So what I've done is I've got the notes pulled up, or the slideshow pulled up right here on my computer, and in front of me I also have the printed out copy of the student notes. So these are both available to you in Schoology, and we're just going to be going over it together. If you would like to have the slideshow pulled up on your own, you can do that too, but I have it pulled up here for you. The great thing about this is that unlike when I do lectures in person, you can pause me whenever you want, and you can go back and see things as you need to. I do recommend, whether you've printed out your student notes or not, I definitely do recommend having something to write with and write on in front of you, or if you're a note typer, I like to type notes, do that, whatever you prefer, because here and there will be things that I add in to the notes that aren't necessarily in here or might not be on the slideshow. So it's just good to have something right in front of you. Not to mention, as we're going through all this, obviously, I'm recording this, I'm pre-recording it, so it'll be a recording that's already happened. But as we're going through this, I 100% suggest that you write down any questions that you might have, because we will have our daily WebEx meetings or virtual conferences or whatever. You're going to have open communication with me, obviously. And I want you to write down those questions that you have as we go through this, because if you have that question, then odds are so will someone else. So please, please, please write down your questions. Either email them to me, wait until the next Q&A session when we do a WebEx, whatever it might be, so that I can get to all those questions. Before I get started on this, I do want to say I sent out the email this morning inviting your parents to the Schoology account. So I'm getting a lot of parent emails right now, which is super exciting. But if you hear a notification ding over and over, I'm so sorry. It's because I'm getting a lot of emails from your parents, and I'm super excited about that. So before we start, this slideshow and these notes have a lot in them, and I don't want that to make you panicky, because we're going to do them in chunks. So if you'll look at the notes on here, if you've got it on your computer, wherever you've got it, you've got that opening page that tells you this is Unit 1, the Living World Ecosystems. And on the back of that one, on the first page, you've got a whole table of contents. So this is a total of like 25 pages of notes, and that is a lot. But this is going to be a few different lectures. So I don't want you to panic and think, oh my gosh, I've got to learn all of this like today. It's not that deep. It's okay. But you've got your table of contents, and it hops right into the content. So that is what we are going to talk about together today. A lot of this might just be me saying, all right, here's some basic vocabulary. I'm not going to read things to you that I know you're capable of reading and understanding yourself. Not to mention, since this is the very first lecture of the very first unit of the class, I'm assuming and hoping that a lot of this is stuff that you already know. So after all of that spiel, we can go ahead and hop in. So the initial vocabulary, am I not allowed to click that? The initial vocabulary that we have on here should hopefully be things that you already know about. Obviously, we've got ecology, the study of how organisms interact with each other and with their environment. That's a big thing that I think people don't realize. A lot of people get ecology confused with this idea that it's just the study of the environment, right? But that's not necessarily true. It's how organisms interact with each other and with their environment. So it's those interactions that are the biggest chunk of what we're going to be looking at in our ecology unit. Things like cell, organism, population, community, ecosystem, those are, excluding cell maybe, but organism through ecosystem, those are going to be terms that a lot of times people will use interchangeably, which is not good because they don't mean the same thing. So obviously if they have different definitions, you should not use them interchangeably. This little the way they have this basic ecology vocab set up right here is nice because it does go in order from smallest to biggest, with the cell being the smallest, obviously, and smallest functional unit of life, and ecosystem being the largest. And it can also be kind of frustrating because some of these definitions have the other terms in them. So for example, community has the word population in it, and ecosystems definition has the word communities in it. So that's going to be one of those things you're just going to have to familiarize yourself with, and whatever method works best for you. Since they are listed in order here, that will definitely be a help. I want to make sure I go through this in the same way. Oh, I gotta move my face. Okay. So ecology, like we said, how they interact with each other and with their environment. That is super important, those interactions. So that where does my face go? We'll go over there. So this is a really helpful infographic right here. Like we said, we've got individual, and below individual would be cell, right? We got that one right there. So individual, population, community, ecosystem. And then if you want to keep going and go even bigger, we've got biome. And then biosphere is obviously all the living things on the earth. Yeah, there we go. Community, ecosystem. So moving right along, we've got our trophic levels, or trophic levels, however you prefer to say it. I won't judge you either way, as long as you don't make fun of me for how I say it. These trophic levels, the easiest way to think about it is that it's a pyramid. They are successive, so it's levels in order of organisms that consume each other, so, or a hierarchy of feeding levels. So, for example, your stereotypical idea of like an eagle eats a fish that eats a cricket that eats grass, so those trophic levels, one thing eating another thing, and essentially how energy passes through an ecosystem. So, okay, they said hawk, snake, mouse, but grasshopper. Very similar, right? Those stereotypical things that we think about when we think trophic levels, or food chains, things along those lines. So in this case, we've got a terrestrial food chain as well as a marine food chain. And it also goes down deeper into the different types of organisms. You've got your producers. Obviously, they're called that because they produce their own food. They are organisms that use the energy of the sun to produce usable forms of energy. So anything that doesn't have to eat other things, basically. Now, whenever I say this, I always have a student who's like, well, what about Venus flytraps or other pitcher plants or other carnivorous plants? But those organisms can live without those animals or bugs, insects that they do consume. So if it can live using only the energy of the sun, so like my plants that I have in my classroom, algae, whatever it might be, they produce their own energy from that, and they are a producer because they're producing their own energy. Fairly easy to remember those ones. They make those needed nutrients from compounds and energy that they obtain from their environment. So you've got water, you've got soil, you've got sun, and then throw a little bit of carbon dioxide in there, and you've got some happy plants. And they carry out photosynthesis to do these things. So producers, also known as autotroph. This would be that time in class where I would say, all right, we're going to break down this word. We know that auto means what? I'll give you a second. Do you know what auto means? Do you have to Google it? I don't know. Automobile, auto, I don't know, other things. Autotroph. Auto just means self. And then troph or trough, it means feeding. Like if you think like, oh, pigs eat out of a food trough. Whatever, I don't know, however you choose to remember things. But autotroph, it's self-feeding. So, parent email. It's self-feeding. So anything that feeds itself produces its own food, autotroph, also known as producer. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we have consumers. I'm going to move my face again. We have consumers, or heterotroph. Hopefully we do know what hetero means, right? Hetero just means different. So in this case, these organisms have to get their food from different sources. In this case, by consuming other organisms. So they can't produce their own energy through photosynthesis. If you've seen that SpongeBob episode where he decides he has no friends and he lives in his house and he just says photosynthesis, it's that. Like, we can't do that, unfortunately. So anything that does have to get its energy from eating other things, consumer, it makes sense. It's consuming something else. Or heterotroph. And again, I'm sorry, y'all. I know a lot of this is probably a review for you guys, and you're like, I've been knowing this, but we're going to go ahead and lay that foundation, that groundwork, so that I know for sure you know these things before we move on to more things, more topics. Herbivore versus carnivore. You guys know this. I know that you know this. I don't want to insult your intelligence by repeating things to you that I know you already know. Herbivores, consumers that eat producers, also known as a primary consumer. So this is where we kind of get into that graph that we saw earlier, where you've got producers, primary consumers, secondary, tertiary, and then quaternary. So getting into those guys, primary consumers are going to be herbivores. Anything that is only eating producers. It's only eating essentially plants or other autotrophs. Meanwhile, carnivore, consumer that eats other consumers. Carnivores eat meat. We know that. We've known that. So here we've obviously got all of our, well, I assume they're putting all these together because they're saying they're all herbivores. But I actually raised a pet squirrel last fall, which, if you've noticed my acorn yet, is for my sweet little squirrel angel, Angus. And they do sometimes eat insects as well. So not completely an herbivore. But these guys definitely, unless they maybe accidentally like eat a bug off a leaf, but I don't know. So we've got some herbivores. These guys would be obviously carnivores. Although I do think that wolves might eat the occasional berry. I don't know. I'm taking issue with the slideshow and I shouldn't. So if we're moving on up that ladder, you've got secondary consumers. And secondary consumers are going to be carnivores that eat primary consumers. So we're just kind of going down that list, the way that everybody consumes the other guys. So meanwhile, tertiary consumers are going to be almost completely carnivores that eat secondary consumers. So they're going to be eating things that are generally other predators. So these are the big guns up here. But bears also eat berries. So. Oh, there you go. Okay, they're proving me right. So omnivore, omni means both or all, means all. So an organism that eats producers and consumers. So it eats plants and animals. Most of us are omnivores, unless you're a vegan or vegetarian. More power to you. If you are, I've tried. I can't do it. I mean, I could. I don't have the willpower. But omnivores, they eat both. Detrivores, or detritivore. Detrivore is so much easier to say, but detritivores, these organisms are some of my favorites. I think they're really cool, even though they're kind of gross. These are organisms that break down dead things and waste products. So detritus or detritus, oh my gosh, man, my pronunciations are a struggle today. Detritus, those are just going to be the parts of dead organisms and fragments of waste of living organisms. So dead stuff, pieces of dead stuff, dying stuff. This could be things like roadkill. It could be leaves that have fallen off a tree and now they're laying on the forest floor and they're slowly starting to break down and decompose. It could be, in this case of our dung beetles, it could be waste from other animals or poop, whatever. I think that these guys are really interesting. I think that they're cool and I think that they don't get talked about enough. That's my opinion on detritivores. You've also got scavengers. Scavengers are amazing. This is gross, obviously. What we're looking at in this image, this is not exactly pleasing. But think about if we didn't have these guys, right? Like, if we didn't have turkey vultures that you see on the side of the road, people call them buzzards. Actually, not true. Buzzards are a type of hawk that live in England. So if you hear somebody say buzzard, not right. We have turkey vultures. So these turkey vultures, crows, ants, like the things that we see eating other organisms that have already died, like this poor fellow right here, it's gross and we're kind of like, don't love that. But they're like nature's garbage crew, right? They're feeding on carrion, which is just rotting carcasses. It's gross, yes. But think about what our world, our biosphere would look like if we didn't have scavengers and if we didn't have detritivores, right? Like, it would be pretty gross. We'd have dead stuff everywhere. Decomposers, again, love them. Great, 10 out of 10. These are going to be any organism that converts organic matter back into the elements and molecules so that they get recycled back into the ecosystem. Mind-boggling, useful, amazing. I'm going to say when, because I'm speaking it into existence, when you guys come back to class and we get to go to the greenhouse and start making things happen out there, we have a couple of compost bins, and I kind of want to turn those into worm bins because if you have soil, like the soil in our greenhouse currently, is pretty not great. It's pretty dry and lacking in nutrients. So if we were to put some food scraps and some worms in there, maybe let some fungus grow, then it's going to do that. It's going to convert that organic matter, that nasty dry dirt that needs some love, back into those elements and molecules so they can recycle, and we can have great, rich, nutrient-rich dirt again. So cool. Love decomposers too. Species interactions. You've probably heard of most of these things before. I'm going to flip my notes, sorry. I got too excited talking about decomposers. There's a lot. Well, there's 5. But competition, predation, parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. They're all pretty self-explanatory when you think about it. Competition is just when 2 or more organisms or 2 or more species are going after the same resource. So if there's only X amount of rabbits in Madison, Alabama, but there's quite a few coyotes in Madison, Alabama, then all of those coyotes are competing for that same rabbit population, right? So anytime 2 or more organisms or 2 or more species, so maybe the coyote population and the fox population of Madison are both competing for that rabbit population as a food source. So all of that, examples of competition. Resource partitioning. Essentially, you're just using resources in different ways. Places are at different times, and this can reduce the negative impact of competition on survival. So basically, in our example here, these different warbler species are using different parts of that same tree. So they all utilize that tree. They all need something from that tree. But it's not like they're all going for the very top of the tree. So there's only enough for one particular kind of bird. They're all going for different parts of the tree, partitioning, right, to get the resources that they need so that they're not really in as much competition with these other guys. So they can all kind of exist more peacefully. In this case, you've got all these birds that utilize this aquatic area, or this beach, for their food sources. And so you can see you've got different types of birds that spend their time in different parts of the beach. So the oyster catchers over here eating clams and mussels and other shellfish, while the heron is going a little bit deeper and eating some of these small fish. But then you've got flamingos that go down all the way because they've got those long legs. They're adapted to that, right? And they go down further into the water. So everybody's adapted to their own particular area, right? So although technically all of these bird species are in competition with each other, they are not necessarily fighting or competing for the exact same area of the beach. So they're partitioning those resources in a way that allows them all to get what they need. Pretty cool. All right, we're making our way. We're almost, we're like halfway done. Well, we're more than halfway done. Doing great. So let's see how long I've been recording so I don't overwhelm you guys and talk too much. Predation, it's obvious. It's a predator-prey relationship, right? So one animal kills and consumes another animal. It's important to note that this definition does say that one animal kills the other animal because we've talked about animal relationships earlier where one animal is eating another animal, but that other animal is already dead, right? Scavenging. So in this case, predation, it's important to note that the predator is actually eating that prey item that they killed themselves. Slight distinction there. So examples of this, you've got a lion, I should say lioness, because it's the ladies of the lions that actually go hunting. A very cute fox and a bear. All these guys are predators because they are hunting and killing their own prey that they will then eat. Sad, but circle of life. So if you'll look at this one, the relationship, anytime you see the population of the hare, the snowshoe hare, which is a very cute white bunny rabbit, anytime that Arctic fox population goes up, it's normally because that snowshoe hare population had also gone up. They've got a very close relationship. So you can see there was a huge spike in the number of snowshoe hares in like 1946-ish, right? It got really tall up here. And then the next few years afterwards, that population of Arctic foxes also went up. So generally, anytime one increases, so does the other, because one relies on the other with that predator-prey relationship. And that's going to be an example of symbiosis. So it's any close long-term interaction between two species in an ecosystem. And again, these are all breaking down into more categories. Symbiosis is going to include mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. And we're going to go into each of those, if I can click correctly. Wow. When I'm in here by myself doing these, I get tired of my own voice a lot quicker. All right, so mutualism, two organisms that are interacting in a way that is beneficial to both in some way. So it's mutually beneficial, right? Easy to remember, that root word, we got that one. The example, have we seen Finding Nemo? I assume we have. If you haven't, what are you doing? But the example is the sea anemone and the clownfish, because the sea anemone is good because the clownfish attracts other fish to come nearby. And the clownfish benefits because it gets protection from the sea anemone, like other like predators aren't going to come mess with the clownfish because it's hiding in the sea anemone's little tentacles. Another type of symbiosis is commensalism. And this is going to be where one species is benefiting, for sure, but the other species is kind of like, could take it or leave it, little to no impact. So the example for this one is the cattle egret and cows. The cattle egret benefits from eating the insects on the cows, and then it also eats the insects that get stirred up as the cows are walking through the grass, and they disturb the insects, so they fly up, and then the egrets eat them. The cows are generally unharmed and unaffected. They're just kind of chilling. I mean, it seems like they would like the company. I don't know. But commensalism. And then finally, parasitism. And this is something we're probably very familiar with. Parasites. One organism is gaining energy by living on or inside, gross, a host organism. So the parasite is the organism that's benefiting from the host, and the host is the organism being preyed upon and harmed, actively harmed. So this is going to be things like fleas on dogs, fleas and ticks. It's going to be things like tapeworms and other worm things of that nature. Example, humans and mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are parasites. They are awful. I say that I love every single creature on God's green earth. I don't like mosquitoes. They're my exception. They do feed on humans, but they also feed on all kinds of other animals. So we're the hosts, and we're being harmed by the mosquito because they are stealing our blood. Not nice. Not nice at all. All right, let me catch up over here. Energy movement. We are almost at the end. We are doing great. Thank you for sticking with me for this long. If you need a snack break, if you need to pause me, if you need to get some water, just take care of yourself while this is happening. I'm drinking Diet Coke. All right. Energy movement through ecosystems. Energy is stored in the bodies and wastes of organisms and flows through ecosystems from one trophic level to another. So hopefully by this point in our science career, we know that all the energy on Earth, all of it, comes from the sun, right? So that energy comes from the sun, it goes to the producers, but, I shouldn't point, I should use this. But as the producers are utilizing that energy from the sun, they lose a little bit of that energy as heat. When consumers eat the producers, they're getting that energy from the sun, but they're losing a little bit as heat as well. Let me move my face again. Same thing for decomposers. They lose a little bit. And then it goes back into the nutrient pool that gets sucked back up into those producers, into those plants, those autotrophs. Exciting stuff. Food chains. Awesome. Amazing. Love them. Very straightforward. The sequence of consumption just means they're eating something, right? So the sequence of consumption from producers through tertiary consumers. It could also be looked at as the movement of energy between trophic levels. So like I said, all energy starts out from the sun. It goes into, in this case, in this example of a food chain, it goes into the grass. Grasshoppers eat the grass, obviously. A shrew, very cute, like a mouse, cuter nose. Shrew eats the grasshopper. And then eventually an owl is going to eat that shrew. So as that happens, the energy that the owl is getting from that shrew is the same energy that the producer or the grass got from the sun at the beginning. So it's just the sequence, right? And if something's a sequence, it means it's going in order, right? So this is a perfect order: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's easy to read, straight line, food chain. Meanwhile, a food web, right? These are going to be a little bit more complicated, and it's going to show the interrelationships of energy flow in a more diverse community. So let's say I'm very curious to know about the lifestyle of a shrew. Then I'm going to use a food chain, right? It's a little bit more simple, straightforward. I know where their energy is coming from. But if I'm like, I want to look at this grassland ecosystem, then I'm going to have to look at a much bigger picture, this whole complex food web. You've got your hawk, and I don't know how I feel about this clip art because that hawk sure does look like a bald eagle, in which case mislabeled. And you can see if you wanted to, you could put the sun right here still, right? Because that's where all that energy is coming from. The grass gets the energy from the sun. That heads to the mouse, the rabbit, the grasshopper. And then you've also got these secondary consumers that are eating the primary consumers. And then you've got your tertiary consumer over here, who's the head honcho, who's eating all these other guys, right? So it's just a little bit more complicated because you can see the hawk does eat lizards, but the hawk also eats grasshoppers, and the lizard eats grasshoppers. So it's following the energy flow. That is one thing that I think people have a tendency to forget. If I put a question on a test or on a quiz or reading check or whatever, and it says, what is a food web showing? And you said something like, oh, well, it's showing what eats what in a food system. I'm not sure I would give you full credit for that, right? Because it's not necessarily what's eating what. We're tracking that flow of energy. Because notice what direction these arrows are pointing in. The arrows aren't pointing from, okay, the hawk eats the rabbit, so I'm going to point an arrow from there to there. No, it's saying that the grass was the root of energy for all of these animals, and the sun was the root of energy for the grass. So we're tracking the energy. We're not tracking what's eating the other organisms. Hopefully that makes sense. So if we're interpreting this food web, I think we're about there. Then we could say this one's obviously for an aquatic ecosystem. Maybe we're at the beach, we're on the coast, something along those lines. You've got your seagull is obviously your tertiary consumer here. And the seagull is going to eat just about everything, right? The seagull is going to eat crabs. It's going to eat mussels. If you don't know what mussels are, they're just kind of like clams. They're similar. They're crustaceans. You got starfish, and the root of all of these guys is still those autotrophs, right? The autotrophs are still the base of this food web. And those autotrophs are getting their energy from where? From the sun, because auto means self, and they're producing food for themselves. So we are still getting our energy from the autotroph. The shrimp is getting its energy from seaweed and plant plankton, which goes to the sea anemone, right? So it's just tracing how that energy could potentially flow within this ecosystem. And then finally, the last thing we're really going to be talking about is the trophic pyramid, and we're going to really dive into this a little bit more with tomorrow's notes. And we've kind of been hinting at this the whole time, right? That the usable chemical energy, right? It's going to go down through each trophic level in a food chain or a food web. So you've got your producers. There's a whole bunch of them, right? Down here at the bottom. It's a big wide base of that pyramid because that's where all of our energy comes from the sun. But starting with these producers, 100% energy. I don't know if you can see that. If you can see that right there, 100% energy for producers. But then when you move up to herbivores, things like zooplankton, snails, urchins, these are going to be things that are going to be eating only the producers. They're only eating those plants. They only have 10% energy. So we've gone from 100% to 10%. Carnivores, who are going to be the meat eaters, obviously they're eating these herbivores. They only have 1% energy. And remember, this is that same energy. We started with 100. with our producers, and it's going down each level. So it's just that idea that as energy flows up through an ecosystem, you're losing some of it, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about where that energy goes and how it gets lost and the law of 10% and all kinds of other fun things in our next lecture. But that will be it for right now. Hopefully, that was somewhat useful. I certainly hope so. Since this is my first time recording one of the lectures. I will say, if after watching this you have any suggestions, if you're like, hey, I think I would learn a little bit better if you did this instead of that, whatever, I'm open to criticism because this is new to all of us, obviously. But I will see you guys soon. You're amazing. You're wonderful. I hope things are good. Email me if you need me. All right. Bye, guys.